So, that's like some general stuff about strength training that I think is pretty important for everybody to know. So now I want to talk a little bit more about like actually putting some stuff into practice and like how you program and maybe some ideas about like what to actually do. So I think there's like a couple of really key things that are important anytime you're putting together a program, specifically for strength, but for other goals as well. Number one is that the key thing is specificity, sport practice, whatever you want to call that. The idea of that SAID principle, that like we want the training to be specific to the goals. Second important thing is fatigue management. So we talked a bunch about stress. So we'll talk about ways that you can kind of like manage recovery to make sure that you're able to handle and recover from that stress you're putting on your body so you can make progress. And then the final one is the idea of like kind of addressing weak points and like assistance exercises, what you should put in there for that. I'm a big fan of like keeping it pretty simple with that stuff. So we'll talk about a little bit about how to go around that. So specificity, like a really fancy word for that SAID principle, like how specific something is to your training. So I would think of it as like a continuum. And if we're powerlifters, like I said, the sport that we do is max, squat, bench, and deadlift. So right at the top of that continuum is like those competition lifts for 1 rep max. That's like the most specific you can get. So like if my squat 1 rep max goes up by 10 pounds, like I got better. Pretty straightforward. I don't need to like guesstimate, I don't need to use a calculator, I don't need to like maybe if this, like I know. Moving on down from that, I can use the same movements but at like different intensities. So if I do 80%, 85%, 70% of like a squat or a bench press, like I'm still doing the movement. It's still really specific again because it is that competition movement, but it's a little bit less specific to the 1 rep max because again it's not a 1 rep max. And so that sometimes like people get carried away in hitting rep maxes and stuff like that, or like I set a new PR like 8 rep max or 5 rep max or 10 rep max or whatever, 3 rep max, and like the closer that number gets to a 1 rep max, the more value it actually has. So like you're up in your 3 rep max by like 10 pounds, pretty good indicator you got stronger. Up in your 10 rep max by 10 pounds is like good, but that may or may not actually translate into a 1 rep max. So that, again, just something to keep in mind. Moving on down from that, that would be, the next one would be like, I call them supplemental exercises, but basically movements that look a lot like the competition lifts, but aren't quite the competition lifts. So things like, an off-style squats, like a front squat, or high bar squat if you use a low bar squat, safety bar or something like that. Close grip bench presses, incline bench presses, wide grip bench presses, deficit deadlifts, block pulls, things like that. So they're like pretty closely related. They're still those movements, but just like slight variations. And so again, if you like bring up your front squat, there's a pretty good chance that like that relates to bringing up your back squat, but it's not a guarantee. Again, it's not as much a guarantee as if you like bring up your 1 rep max back squat. That's pretty obvious, right? And then the final bit is like assistance exercises, and these are movements that like train the muscles that are required for the lifts, but like don't really mimic the lift. So like if I want to squat, I need like a fair bit of quads. So I can do like a hack squat or a leg press or a leg extension, and like that'll like stimulate the muscles. I can build like quad muscle doing that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like my squat's going to go up. So again, that's why it's like on the bottom of the thing. It's got the least amount of transferability, but it's still important to put those things in there. And if you have like weak points or muscle groups that are lagging, bringing those up, provided your technique is on point, stuff like that we'll talk about. That's a pretty good way of like bringing up the lift in general. So moving on, we want to talk a little bit about like fatigue management, or basically dealing with that whole like combination of training stress and lifestyle stress. So obviously, you train hard, you get tired. That's like a pretty straightforward idea. If I do like a real hard workout, I'm just going to be beat and wrecked, and it hurts, and like you get soreness and you're stiff and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to train hard enough, like I said, to get that progressive overload and provide that stimulus to get better, you're going to incur fatigue, you're going to get tired. That has to happen. And if you're not putting in enough work, you're not providing that progressive overload, you're not going to get any better. So like fatigue in general, getting tired, that's important to good training. But if you get like too much, if it accumulates to too great of a degree, it starts to impact performance. So we get like too beat up, too tired, we can't lift the weights that you need to lift, you can't actually do, again, the training you need to do to get stronger, and like eventually that'll impact structural integrity, and so that, you get little nagging injuries that can become very big injuries. So in that sense, you've got to be able to manage it, and it's gonna have to increase over time with training, and then you're gonna have to bring it back down to like a reasonable level so that you can, again, continue to keep training.